Hey, thanks for joining us online today. We believe that Jesus wants to do so much through you and for you, and we'd love to hear about how he's working in your life. Please take a second to email your story to stories@rise-church.com. We hope this message leaves you feeling uplifted and encouraged. Enjoy.
But believe it or not, this is the #1 most requested song on the station. It's I Can Only Imagine by Mercy Me.
That's so good. Such a good movie. How many of you have seen the entire movie before? It's so good. I watched it a few weeks ago, and I didn't really have high expectations about it. And afterwards, I was like, this was such a great movie. I can't believe I waited so long to watch it. And so this morning, if I haven't had a chance to meet you, I know some of you might be thinking, you are not Pastor Adam. I am not. I get the privilege of being married to him. If today is your first time here, welcome. We're glad that you came out to worship with us. And I'm excited to bring the message today. We're going to be looking at this promise from God that God will not waste your pain. Do you believe that, Rise Church? Do you believe that he will not waste your pain? And when we look at this story of Bart, he writes this song that impacted so many people's lives, but it would not have happened had he not gone through what he went through in his life. And he was able to use that to propel him into writing an incredible song, and his past became part of his ministry. How many of you love to read? You love to dive into a really good book. A couple of you. I'm not a big reader. I wish that I was. I loved to read when I was a child, but not so much now as an adult. My son loves to read. I have never seen a child devour a book and so many books in such a small amount of time. He can pick up a book and read it all day long. And when I look at a really big book of a novel of someone's life, I think of how that just relates to our lives. And how our lives are just written chapter by chapter, page by page, and some of our stories are longer than others. Some of our stories are more difficult than others, and some of us have a lot of chapters in our story that we wish weren't there, that we maybe wish we could have just skipped and not had in our life. I remember telling a friend one time, just trying to, give her the cliche preacher thing, hey, you're going to make it through this. This is just one chapter in your story. And she's like, yeah, well, I just wish God would tone down the drama in my story just a little bit. I was like, I can feel you there. I totally understand that. And just like Bart here, we all have a story to tell, right? A story of our life. Some of our stories are marked with sadness and grief and loss. And I love that they asked him in this movie, what did you have to go through to write this? This song did not just happen in 10 minutes. You had to experience some things in your life to write this song. It was a story that was written chapter by chapter, and I think that often in our lives, we want to rush through the difficult seasons of our life. We want to flip through those chapters a little bit faster, but it's often in the process of those long, hard chapters of our story that God will begin to reveal his purpose to us through the long, difficult things. He wants to birth some things in us that are going to impact our future. He wants to mold us through the difficult moments, refine us through the fire. And I think that if we rush through that process, sometimes we might miss out on the purpose in our pain. I love the story of Ruth in the Bible, and I don't know if you're super familiar with her story, and I did a Bible study years ago on the study of Ruth, and it really it impacted my life, and I often like to pull things from her story. And it's not a really long chapter in the Bible. If you go read it, it's just a few chapters, and you might even read it and think it doesn't even seem like that great of a story. But when you really study it and you get and learn the context behind what she was experiencing and the culture that she lived in, you can really appreciate the beauty of her story. And so in the book of Ruth, we find Naomi, and Naomi is married, and she has 2 sons. And her sons are each married, one of them married to Ruth. And in a short amount of time, Naomi loses her husband, and she loses both of her sons, leaving her alone with her 2 daughter-in-laws. And one of them chooses to go back home to her family, but Ruth says, I'm going to stay with you, Naomi. Heart and soul, I'm with you in this. And And so they decide to travel to another town where they have heard there is a man that lives there in that town who is a distant relative of Naomi's husband. And in the days of the Bible, it was if there was someone who was a relative of your spouse when they passed on and this man chose to marry you or the daughter, they were called a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer. And if he chose to marry her, it would just change their life. He'd be able to purchase all the land that was her husband's that they could not own. And it's a crazy thing, but they go to this land, to this town, and Ruth begins to work. From morning until night, she begins to pull grain in a field. And it was a difficult job, but she did it all day long until Boaz, this man that is their relative, notices her. And he approaches her and he says, I have heard about you. I've heard about how you're taking care of Naomi and how you're working so hard day in and day out. I pray that the Lord blesses you. And so he begins to feed her and give her food and water to take home to Naomi. And in the end, long story short, he chooses to marry Ruth. And they have a son, they have a child, and they gather the townspeople and they're speaking over Ruth and Naomi. And they say, praise the Lord who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons. And so this story has such a beautiful ending of just redemption and God stepping in and doing something incredible. But it would not have been a beautiful story had it not began with loss and heartache and suffering. And as hard as it is in our life, we want to skip through these hard moments, and Ruth probably would have wanted to skip over this, but had she not endured this season and this hard moment, it would not have given God the opportunity to do something incredible with her hurt and her pain. Amen. And because of that, because he redeemed her hurt and he redeemed her story, he was able to use her to impact others. She impacted Boaz's life and this child's life that they had. She impacted Naomi's life and her own life, and everything changed. Now, I don't like being in pain, physical pain. I like to think that I'm really strong and tough when it comes to being in physical pain, but I'm not. If you're ever around me and I stub my toe or hurt myself, it's like I've broken my entire leg. And my husband got an elliptical machine for our house recently. It's this big, giant elliptical, and it's sitting in front of our pretty fireplace. But he is like in it to get healthy. He wants our family to get healthy. And so he's just been crushing it, working out on this thing, sometimes like an hour a day. And when I got on for the first time, I was like, all right, like I'm committed. I'm going to do this. And I get on the elliptical, and really I get about 5 minutes in, and I can just feel the burn in my thighs right here. And man, the moment that I start hurting, I'm done. Like, I just got off and was like, I don't want to do this. My legs hurt. And he's like, that's the point. You're supposed to be in a little bit of pain. But no, every day I try to get on, and I'm like, I'm committed today. Today I'm going to do this. And then no, I get right back off. I think it's natural for us to want to avoid pain in our life. I don't think it's natural for us to be able to endure pain, whether physical or emotional. But pain is unavoidable in our life. We know this. God does not promise us a pain-free life. He actually tells us in his word, in this world, you're going to have some troubles. It's not going to be easy, but you can take heart, amen, because God has overcome the world, and he just promises us that he will not waste it. That he will not waste our pain for a moment, that he is a God who works all things together for those that love him, and that he will use our pain not to bring us glory, but to bring glory to his name. There have been a lot of difficult seasons in my life that I have often prayed, God, I just wish you would take this from me. Like, I know that you can. I know that if you would just speak the words, you could change this situation in a heartbeat. You could take this away. And I'm not saying that's a bad prayer necessarily to pray, but I think sometimes when we're going through hard things in our life, we can miss out on the opportunity to pray, God, would you use this? God, would you open my eyes to see what you're doing in this situation? God, would you use me? Would you allow my pain to not be wasted and actually use it to bring some glory to your name? don't let it go to waste. And that's the beauty of God. He's not going to let your pain go to waste for a single moment. He's going to take it and he's going to use it to bring glory to his name. Several years ago, I went to a women's conference in Nevada, and I got to sit and listen to a message by a woman named Kay Warren. If you've never heard of Kay Warren, she is married to Rick Warren, and they pastor an incredible church in California. And a few years ago, Kay and Rick lost their son to suicide. And when I got to attend this conference, it was one of the first times she was going to be speaking since losing her son. And she was going to be speaking a message on pain and suffering. And she gave this incredible illustration on eagles. And I don't know if anybody in the house ever studied up on eagles before. Really cool. There's a lot you can learn from them, a lot of leadership principles. And several years ago, I shared in another message, if you were with us for a long time, I shared a message on this illustration. And I know so many of you weren't here, so I want to share it again because this message and this illustration really impacted my life, and it changed my perspective on suffering. And so I went and did my own little study on eagles. And a few things I learned about them is eagles are the only birds who love the storm. When all other birds try to flee from a storm and hide, eagles will fly right into it, and they will use the wind of the storm to actually rise higher in just a matter of seconds. And they will use the pressure of the storm to glide them higher without actually having to use any of their own energy. They get their strength and their energy from the storm itself. They're able to lock their wings in a storm, and rather than flying away, they use it to fly higher. And in a storm, an eagle will never hit the ground. So they use this storm to rise above, and it's no surprise at all that God uses eagles to illustrate us in the Word of God. In Isaiah 40:31, he says, "But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." So God's word is saying here, hey, are you going through a difficult time? Are you experiencing a storm in your life? Trust in me, and you will find a supernatural strength in me that you would not have experienced otherwise. You see, the eagles are able to fly higher in this storm. They could not have done that had it not been for the storm. So God is saying, I will use your pain and your trauma and your suffering and your loss to actually help you rise above and experience a supernatural strength in me that would not have come if it weren't for the storm. And he will take you through this storm and propel you into your future. And before you know it, you are rising above, and you're experiencing a strength that is unmatched to anything else. We go back to our movie. The manager asked Bart, "What are you running from?" And if you go watch the entire movie, it's clear that Bart is running from his past, from the pain that he had experienced, the abuse he had experienced from his dad, running from his story rather than running to God. And I can kind of relate to this because it's easy in my life to want to run from the pain and just kind of pretend like it's not there and like it doesn't really exist rather than dealing with it. And church, I wonder today how many of us are experiencing some hard things in our life and we're running from it rather than running to the one who can bring us hope and healing and purpose to our pain and to our storm in our life. God will not waste your pain. He will use it, but it's going to require some things of you. It's going to require you to be willing to run to him. It's going to require you to be willing to lay some things at his feet and surrender. And laying it down at his feet does not mean we just lay it down and we get to walk away and everything's just fine. But when we lay it down at his feet, we're giving it over to him and allowing him to use it and do something with it that we never could. And we're able to move forward in spite of our pain. Rather than it hindering us, we're able to move forward in our pain. There was a time in my life that we had just walked through really difficult season, and I had walked through just a season of loss, and as I was kind of grieving through this season, it just brought up a lot of the pain from my childhood, and I felt like I was grieving my mother's loss and so much all at the same time. And I remember waking up one morning, and I don't know if you're like me, but I don't like to cry a lot, and so I'll typically try to go through an entire week and just hold it all together until I finally get to a moment where I just feel like I'm going to explode. And I remember waking up early that morning. I couldn't sleep well that night, and I walked into my bathroom, and I could feel the tears burning in my eyes. And I remember sitting on the side of my tub and closing the door and just grabbing a towel and just weeping, just letting it all come out and crying and crying. And in that season, I had really felt like God was kind of silent. And I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way, like, God, I'm just praying and I'm asking you to do some things, and I'm not seeing you move, and I'm not hearing you answer me. And I just cried, and I really just let out all of my frustrations, and I let everything out to him. And really just in a moment of desperation, I just said, God, here it all is. Like, here is all my hurt, here is all my pain, here is all my frustration, here is everything that I'm walking through. Like, here it is. And I just laid it out there on the floor and said, now you take it and do something with it, because I can't carry it anymore. And I sat there for a few minutes, and I just said, okay, God, now what? Like, what am I supposed to do now? I've given this all to you. I'm going to surrender it to you. Now what? And in that moment, I heard God's voice, not audibly, but in my heart. And he said, get up. And I said, excuse me? God, I told you that I'm hurting right now, and you're going to tell me to get up? He said, I need you to get up, because I've got some things that I want to do with you, and now that you've surrendered it to me, I can get to work. But I need you to get up off the floor, because I can't do it if you're going to sit here crying. I need you to get up. This is good. Cry. Get it out. That's healthy. But I need you to get up. And so I remember standing up off the floor, and it was one of those moments where I felt like God's presence was so strong in the room that if I even moved, I felt like I was going to bump into him. And I remember standing up and just saying, okay, like, let's do this. And in that moment, God just began to remind me of some things in my life. He began to remind me that the promises of his word were true, that he's a God that's not going to waste my pain, that I could be confident that he was going to work all things together for my good, that I could see the goodness of the Lord even through my pain, that when I walked through the fire, he was going to walk with me and that I would not be burned. And he reminded me that he is a redeeming God and that he would take this mess and he would do something with it. And can I tell you, church, the release that I felt when I stood up off that floor and I was not holding on to all of my hurt and my pain any longer. Because when I walked into that bathroom that morning, I felt physically like I was just trying to hold everything together. Like I had all of these things going on in my life and it all hurt. But I felt like I was just physically ill and like I'm just trying to hold it all together. And that moment that I just released it to him, I'm telling you, my stance and the position of my heart just changed. And I felt like I was able to walk out of that room and surrender to him. And God just began to release some things in my life. And can I tell you, church, the best stance for us to walk in is arms open and surrender, not holding on to our hurt and our pain and our burdens any longer, but a heart full of hope and healing and arms surrendered into worship to him. And this is what happened in my life, and God really just started to release some things in me, and he began to build some great faith in my life, and he released a spirit of worship in my life that I could truly come in on a Sunday morning and worship him. And he just did so much in my life. And just like Bart in this movie, like his future was released when he surrendered it to God. He still lost his dad. Everything was not perfect in his life, but when he surrendered it, God was able to step in and do something that he couldn't do on his own. The pain of his past didn't hinder him any longer. It actually propelled him to his ministry. And just like Ruth, she trusted the process. She trusted that God was going to do something, and her pain was not wasted, and her life was redeemed and full of hope and purpose. I want us to look at a picture up on the screen, and I did ask these women permission before I shared this. But these two women that are here worshiping in the front row, I looked over on a Sunday and saw them over there worshiping, and if you know their story at all, you'll know why it's a big deal that they both were here on the front row worshiping. Both of them have lost their husband way too young. One of them a few years ago, and the other just a couple of months ago. And when I looked over and I saw them worshiping, I was like, God, why are they able to do that? Like, how are they sitting here on the front row, arms open, worshiping you? And God said, because they have surrendered their pain to me. They have laid it at my feet, and they're not trying to carry the burdens of it all on their own any longer. And church, I wonder how many of you here in this place today, you've got a story to tell, a real story of hurt and pain. And I'm not minimizing your pain at all. I'm just asking you, will you surrender it to him? Will you lay it down at his feet and allow him to do something with it that you never could? I know there are people in this house who have something to offer through your story of pain. I know there are parents in here who have buried children, and God's saying, will you hand this pain over to me so that I can redeem it and I can give it some purpose so that you can minister to other people? I know there are friends in here who have been betrayed by other friends, and God's saying, will you surrender this to me? Because I'm going to take your pain and actually allow you to use it to help others. So many of you that have gone through hardship and hurt and pain, and God's saying, surrender it to me. I want to take it and use it. So this morning, the only action step you need to take is to surrender it to him. Give it over to him, and he will not.
Thanks for watching today. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram. If our church has had an impact on you and you'd like to support what Jesus is doing here, you can do so by going to rise-church.com/give and select the giving option that best suits you. Thanks for watching online and have a great week.